It was the kind of night where the wind howled just enough to make the trees sway and creak, but not enough to bring comfort. My parents' house was large, set back from the road, nestled on the edge of a dark pond, the water barely visible under the moonlight. On the other side of the pond was a small town park, but it was mostly empty at night, save for the occasional jogger or late-night wanderer. It was a quiet, upscale neighborhood, but that night, the quiet felt wrong. I was 21 years old, home alone, as I often was during summer breaks. College had given me freedom, and my parents' multiple homes provided me with plenty of space to myself. Their main house was back in the city, and they were often away. I liked the solitude, but tonight something felt different. I had settled into this sunroom that evening, my favorite place in the house during the summer. The room was cozy, the best spot to relax, with all the windows wide open to catch a cool breeze. I was curled up on the couch near the corner window, watching my favorite show. When I first heard it, splash, at first, I thought it was just a duck or a goose flapping its wings in the pond. They fought often enough to make loud, erratic splashes in the water, but then it persisted. It wasn't the usual noise, it was heavier, more deliberate. I turned the volume down on the TV, listening harder. The sound was coming from the pond, but it didn't sound like any animal. It was more like the splashing of a person, someone swimming in the water. A cold prickle ran down my spine. I opened the door to the sunroom and stepped onto the deck. Squinting into the darkness, I could barely make out the outline of the water, reflecting a faint silver from the moon. Then I heard a soft humming, just above the splashing, as if someone was enjoying themselves in the water. I froze. No one swam in the pond. In fact, no one had swum there for years. The water was stagnant, filled with algae and debris. Whoever this was, they were trespassing. I flicked on the back deck lights, thinking I might catch a glimpse of the intruder. For a moment, the splashing and humming stopped, and I saw a brief flash of ripples before the pond went still. Whoever was out there knew I was watching. I stepped back inside, locking the door behind me. I texted my brother, who was away at college, but he didn't reply right away. I tried to push the feeling of unease away and resumed watching TV, though I couldn't focus on anything anymore. My mind kept drifting back to the splashing. Then I heard something again, scrape. It was quieter, more subtle this time. The sound came from the deck outside, just beneath my window. I grabbed the remote to turn off the TV, and as the room fell into darkness, I heard it heavy breathing. A person was outside my window, breathing loudly, too loudly, as if they were trying to be heard. My heart thudded in my chest as I froze, staring into the blackness. The breathing continued, ragged and uneven. I couldn't bring myself to move. Then, a deep voice broke the silence. "I see you." The blood drained from my face, and my stomach dropped. I lay flat on the couch, hoping to stay out of sight. My pulse pounded in my ears. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. "Paul," I croaked, whispering the name of one of our neighbors. Maybe it was him, just messing around, trying to freak me out. But my voice trembled, betraying my doubt. The man outside didn't respond. Instead, I heard the sound of footsteps barefoot, soft but heavy, moving away. Each step felt like it was pushing me deeper into panic. I didn't dare move, not even to breathe. I waited, my mind racing. I waited for what felt like forever before the voice in my head screamed at me to check the locks. Adrenaline flooded my system, and I bolted upright, running to the front door. Locked. The side entrance was locked too. Every door was secure. I texted my parents, my heart racing. My dad replied almost immediately, telling me to check the backyard lights and to make sure no one was still out there. He said it was my job to keep the house safe. I grabbed a large kitchen knife, feeling ridiculous but desperate. I stepped onto the back deck, the moonlight barely illuminating the yard. There were wet footprints on the deck, bare footprints that had started to dry but were still visible in the soft light. I followed the trail, my hands shaking, every instinct telling me to run back inside. But I had to know who or what was out there. The footprints led me to the side of the deck. I peered over the edge, my eyes scanning the ground below. And then I saw him. A man's head, his eyes and forehead were peeking over the edge of the deck, staring up at me. His face twisted in a strange, almost grotesque grin. His eyes met mine, and for a moment, time stood still. The world shrank down to just me and him. A terrible connection that I couldn't escape. Then, as if sensing my fear, he slowly turned away, vanishing into the shadows. I didn't hesitate. I bolted inside, slamming the door behind me and locking it. My hands were still trembling as I dialed 911. I didn't even think to call my parents until after the dispatcher assured me help was on the way. When they arrived, they asked all the usual questions: if we had any enemies, if there had been any recent issues with neighbors, but no one had an answer. The property was swept, but there was no sign of anyone. My parents left shortly after, and I shut every window, running the air conditioning for added security. The house felt safer with the windows shut, but the terror didn't go away. That night, I lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening for any sound that didn't belong. When I woke the next morning, the sunlight felt like a blessing. I was relieved to see it, but deep down, I knew that whatever happened that night, whoever that man was, wasn't over. The pond was silent again, but something in the air had changed. The house felt heavier, as if the very earth beneath it had absorbed the night's horror. The man never returned, but I couldn't shake the feeling that he was still out there, waiting, and the worst part, I never found out who he was. The night was thick, and the street lights cast long shadows across the parking lot. My dog, Milo, tugged at his leash as we made our usual walk through the cul-de-sac parking lot near our condo. We always went the same route, first in the morning, again in the afternoon, and finally, late at night. I liked the quiet at night, the stillness that blanketed everything. But tonight, that silence felt suffocating. It wasn't too late, maybe just past 9, but the air had an oppressive weight to it. The darkness felt heavier tonight, like it had been waiting. I didn't realize it then, but something was already waiting for us. I always brought a flashlight, no streetlights out here, and listened to music through one earbud, just enough to drown out the outside world, but still keep a part of me alert. I thought that was the smart way to handle late-night walks. But tonight, I wasn't prepared for what came next. I noticed the first thing off, the sound of a voice, distant, almost a whisper, cut through the thick air. My brain barely registered it as I drifted deeper into my playlist. But then it happened again, faint, like a muffled cry. Something was off. I yanked the earbud out and froze, my heart skipping a beat. "Hello," I whispered, my voice swallowed by the silence. There was nothing. Just the low hum of wind rustling the trees. I shook my head and walked forward, but the chill that crawled up my spine told me to stop. Something wasn't right. I took a few steps toward the parking lot, the one that always looked empty at night, with rows of parked cars casting long shadows. Milo, ever the curious dog, was sniffing around the bushes, his tail wagging. I was just about to turn around and head back when I heard it again. A voice, clearer this time, but still muffled, reached my ears, sending a shock through me. "Help," it said, soft but unmistakable. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and I spun around, flashing my light across the lot. Nothing. "Hello," I shouted, my voice louder this time. Nothing answered but the rustling of leaves and the slow thump of Milo's paws as he circled. Oblivious, my breath quickened, and I forced myself to take another step forward, telling myself it was just a prank, just the wind. Then, the voice came again. It was closer this time. "Help," it whispered, but this time, it didn't sound like a child's cry. There was something wrong with it, something dark. The voice wavered, as if it was strained, not quite right, a mix of childish fear and adult weariness, as if someone who had been calling for help for too long. Panic surged. I moved the flashlight back and forth across the lot, shining it under every car, behind every bush. There was no one. The voice kept coming, repeating the word over and over, almost mechanically, like a broken record. I looked down at Milo. His ears were perked, his body tense. He was staring at the left side of the lot, where the larger vehicles were parked, his posture rigid. He'd never reacted like this before. Then I heard it again. "Help." The voice came from the same spot. My hands were shaking. There had to be someone there, but I couldn't find them. I was starting to doubt my own senses. What was happening? I moved closer to where Milo was focused, shining the light in all directions. I could feel the weight of the darkness pressing in on me, but my flashlight couldn't break through it. I felt watched. The hairs on my arms stood straight. I could almost feel something pulling me forward, like an invisible hand, beckoning me to step closer. Then, I noticed something I hadn't before. The voice. It wasn't right. Each time it spoke, it sounded the same, no change in pitch, no change in emotion. The words fell from its lips with the same flatness each time. It was almost as if it wasn't trying to get my attention, but to influence me, drag me into whatever was waiting in the shadows. I looked back at Milo. He was standing still now, staring intently at the dark stretch of parking lot. The unease grew inside me. It wasn't just the voice, it was everything. The way the parking lot seemed to empty, to quiet, as though the world had swallowed it whole. It was too unnatural, too wrong. The flashlight trembled in my hand as I scanned the area again. Nothing. Just the silent rows of cars and the empty space. But the voice, oh God, the voice was still there. I couldn't see the source. It was coming from the left, somewhere near the front of the cars. I was getting closer, and yet it seemed to keep pulling back, luring me deeper into the darkness. I turned to leave, to run back home. But as I did, the voice came one last time, louder, sharper. Help, please. The words didn't sound like a child anymore. They were more urgent, more insistent. I couldn't explain it, but that thing, it was no longer pretending to be a child, whatever it was. It wanted me to come closer. I didn't think. I ran. Milo barked once in confusion and ran beside me as I sprinted back down the familiar path, toward the condo, toward safety. The eerie voice, now a memory, echoed in my ears as I reached the front door and slammed it shut behind me. My mom was in the kitchen, washing dishes. She didn't even look up. Mom, something happened, I gasped, trying to explain, but she just gave me a puzzled look, dismissing it with a shrug. It's just your imagination, you're fine. But I couldn't shake the feeling. I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever I'd heard was real to real. That voice, that chilling, distorted cry for help, wasn't just a figment of my mind. It was something else, something dark, something waiting for me. It started with a feeling of complete hopelessness. My name is Leo, and to be honest, I don't know where I'm going anymore. The world feels like a blur, disjointed pieces I can't seem to put together. I'm 21. Soon to be a senior in college, and already, it feels like the future is a ticking clock I can't stop. My family's a wreck. My friends, they've changed into strangers. The place I used to call home doesn't feel like home anymore. I tried escaping it all, and that's why I ended up in Berlin last year, searching for answers, or maybe just searching for some peace. I ended up in a bar called Rye alone, as usual. I wasn't worried about it. I've always preferred being by myself, the kind of loneliness that becomes a comfort. But that night, the night that everything went wrong, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I had a few beers, then decided to leave. As I fumbled in my pocket for my keys, I realized they weren't there. Of course they weren't. The universe had made its decision. I was going to be stuck. I stumbled out of the bar into the rain. I had nowhere else to go. My apartment was locked up tight, and it was too late to get a replacement key. I thought about calling someone, but who would I even call? The friends I had once kept close were too far away, and my family, well, things weren't good there either. I wandered around for a bit, until I found shelter under a bridge. It wasn't ideal, but at least it was out of the rain. I lay down, my head pounding from the alcohol, but as I began to drift off, a strange sound caught my attention. Faint voices, muffled and distant, yet too distinct to ignore. I sat up, squinting into the darkness across the river. At first, I thought it was just my eyes playing tricks on me. But no, there were 5 men standing in a group on the opposite bank. A small boat was tethered nearby, and they were unloading large bags from it. Something about the scene made my skin crawl. My German isn't great, but I could tell enough to understand that I was witnessing something I wasn't supposed to see. The men were exchanging briefcases and duffel bags, the kind that made my gut twist in a way that was anything but ordinary. I didn't move. I couldn't. Something inside me told me that if I made a sound, If I even moved an inch, I would be noticed, so I stayed still, watching them, wondering how far this was going to go. Then it happened. One of the men, tall and broad-shouldered, suddenly shouted something harsh in German. His hand moved to his waist, pulling out a gun. The others froze, and for a moment, there was nothing but silence and almost unnatural stillness that hung in the air like smoke. Then, chaos. The man with the gun shouted again, this time in a tone that made it clear this wasn't some minor argument. The other man raised his hands in surrender, his face pale with fear. I could see him shaking, and I couldn't tell if it was from cold or terror. They stripped him down, clothes, shoes, everything, throwing his belongings into a pile as if he were just another commodity to be discarded. I wanted to look away, but something kept me there. I couldn't stop staring, unable to tear my eyes from the horror unfolding before me. I knew I had to move. My brain screamed at me to get out of there before I was caught up in whatever this was. But as soon as I stood up to leave, I heard it shouted across the river in a voice that made my blood run cold. There's someone there. I didn't think. I turned and ran. The rain lashed against my face, my legs unsteady beneath me. But I ran as fast as I could. I didn't dare look back. The sound of shouting followed me. The words indistinct but the meaning clear. Don't shoot, they were yelling, and the thought of it sent me into overdrive. I ran through the empty streets of Berlin, each step heavier than the last. My lungs burned, and I could feel my heartbeat thudding in my ears, louder than the echo of my own footsteps. I didn't stop until I was sure I couldn't hear them anymore. But even then, something felt wrong. My brain couldn't catch up to my body. I had escaped, but the fear, it didn't fade. I felt it like a dark cloud hanging over me. As I slowed to a walk, I noticed something. The shadows on the sidewalk were too long, twisting unnaturally under the streetlights. I shook my head, trying to dismiss the thoughts. I was just tired, delirious even. But no matter how much I tried to convince myself that I was fine, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. And then, just as I thought I had outrun everything, I saw him. A figure standing at the edge of the street, barely visible in the fog. My heart stopped. He was tall, too tall, his face obscured by shadows. I took a step back, my breath coming in ragged gasps. He didn't move, but I felt it, the pressure of his gaze. I didn't want to believe it, but I couldn't help myself. He was following me. I broke into a full sprint, but it didn't matter. It felt like I was running in place. The streets never ending, stretching on and on. My mind was playing tricks on me. I told myself it had to be. But then the sound of footsteps behind me began to grow. It was just another Friday afternoon at my high school, the kind where everything seemed to drift by unnoticed. My friend Emma was chattering away about something trivial, but my mind wasn't on her words. My mind was on the chaos waiting for me at home. My foster parents, as usual, were a constant source of stress. Every day felt like I was walking on eggshells, trying to survive their unpredictable moods. Between schoolwork, chores, and keeping the peace at home, I felt like I was suffocating. So, as I walked down the hallway with Emma, I focused on the rhythmic sound of our footsteps, trying to push the nagging weight of everything else out of my head. We passed the lunchroom, and I suddenly felt a pressing need to use the bathroom. Hey, you wanna come with me? I asked Emma, hoping a quick break would clear my head. Nah, I'm good, she shrugged. I'll wait for you outside. I entered the bathroom and immediately noticed something off. It was eerily empty. The bathroom was usually full of students, crowded with chatter and the sounds of running water. But now nothing. It was so quiet that I could hear the faint hum of the fluorescent lights above. I shrugged, chalking it up to an odd coincidence, and walked to one of the stalls. After I sat down, I heard the bathroom door creak open. I glanced at the gap under the stall door, expecting to see someone's shoes, but there was nothing, no movement, no footsteps, just a stillness that made my skin prickle. I thought it was probably just someone hiding from an administrator or a teacher. I've seen kids do that before. Minutes passed. I stood up to adjust my jeans and noticed a series of scribbled messages on the bathroom wall. Random quotes about teachers, a mix of complaints and absurd jokes. I absent-mindedly read them, trying to shake the strange feeling creeping up my spine. Then, The bathroom door opened again. This time, the sound was louder, more abrupt. The echo of it bouncing off the walls felt wrong somehow. I figured whoever had come in must have left, but when I exited the stall, I was frozen in place. Emma was standing in the doorway, her face pale, her eyes wide with disbelief. "What's wrong?" I asked, not understanding why she looked so shaken. She just stared at me, her expression twisted in confusion. "Who was standing behind you?" she whispered. I blinked. "What do you mean?" There was no one else in the stall with me. Her face became even more serious, her voice shaking. I saw someone in there, right behind you." My stomach dropped. "You're messing with me, right?" "There was no one there," I insisted. Emma shook her head quickly, her eyes darting to the ground. "No, I swear. I walked in right before you came out because I needed to go, and I saw someone standing behind you in the stall. Their shoes were touching the back of yours. It was like they were right there with you, just standing still." I felt a chill that went deeper than just the cold bathroom air. "No, Emma, you're wrong. No one was in there. I would have heard them move." Her voice trembled. "I swear. No one came near the door until I walked in." We stood in silence for a moment, the weight of her words sinking in. I didn't believe in the paranormal, never had, but something about her certainty made my blood run cold. I found myself questioning everything. I walked outside, my mind racing. I couldn't shake the feeling that something had happened in that bathroom. I told myself it was just a trick of the light, some weird misunderstanding. But as I walked through the hallway, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I couldn't stop thinking about the feeling of someone standing behind me. I found an administrator in the hallway and told her what had happened. Her response was dismissive. "You probably just misheard something, or Emma was playing a prank. There's no need to worry about it." I wanted to believe her, but Emma's face, so serious, haunted me. She wasn't the kind of person to joke around when it came to things like this. She never took anything seriously, but she was terrified now. I couldn't ignore the strange detail. I had heard the door open twice, but when Emma arrived, no one was in the bathroom. Not a soul had been there, not even for a moment. It didn't make sense. What had I heard? What had she seen? I thought about the feeling of someone watching me as I stood there, alone in that stall. I thought about the absence of footsteps, the unnerving silence that hung over everything. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. The thought wouldn't leave me. What if something had been there? What if someone, or something, had been watching me all along? What if it wasn't just a strange coincidence? The feeling of unease gnawed at me until I couldn't sleep. The next day, I found myself back at school, walking down the same hallway. I passed the bathroom, and my breath hitched. I didn't want to go in, but something pulled me toward it, as if the place itself was calling to me. My heart raced in my chest, but I took a deep breath and forced myself to keep walking. I peeked inside. The bathroom was empty again. I couldn't shake the feeling, though. There was something lurking in the shadows of that place, something I had never understood until now. Something I wasn't supposed to see. It's been years since that day, but the memory hasn't faded. Sometimes, when I close my eyes, I can still feel that presence, lurking just behind me, waiting, and I can't help but wonder if, one day, it'll come back for me. It started with a cold shiver that ran down my spine one quiet evening. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows in my small rental house as I prepared a quick dinner. My first real big girl job was in full swing, and I'd just begun to settle into the small, one-story house I'd rented. There were 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, and enough space for me to be comfortable alone, save for the occasional visit from friends. I had only been living there a few weeks, and everything seemed fine. The house was in a quiet town, the kind where nothing ever seemed to happen. My landlord, Michelle, was a friendly, older woman who often stopped by to check in. We'd talked a lot about life and the neighborhood when I first moved in, but after that, I didn't expect much from her. She was friendly, yet distant. I never thought anything could be wrong with the place. But then, things started happening. It was a regular night, just like any other. I was finishing up my dinner when there came a knock at the door, sharp, deliberate, almost too quiet for the hour. I froze. It was already late. Who could it be? I had no friends or family planning to visit that evening. I hesitated, then went to the door and whispered, "Who is it?" No answer. The knock came again, more persistent this time, like a message. I peered through the peephole. The darkness beyond the door seemed to swallow up any detail. My heart started racing. I didn't open the door. I shouldn't have, but I just couldn't shake the feeling that someone was standing there, waiting for me to answer. I waited for several minutes before the knocking stopped. My breath slowly returned to normal as I tried to convince myself it was nothing, maybe a neighbor or someone lost. But deep down, I felt a knot in my stomach. The next morning, I opened the front door to head out for work. To my shock, there was a note taped to the glass of the storm door. My heart dropped. "Hello, beautiful." I froze, staring at it. My mind scrambled for explanations. It was the same person. The knock, the eerie feeling, it all made sense now. A stalker. I crumpled the note in disgust, tossing it in the trash. I hoped that would be the end of it. But the next night, it happened again. This time, earlier in the evening while I was cooking, I heard a knock at the door. Again, no voice. I stood in front of the door, my heart hammering in my chest. I couldn't see anything through the frosted glass. The house was old, and the storm door didn't lock, which only added to the unease. This was no coincidence. The person was watching me. I called my mom and dad, desperate for advice. My dad, a retired police officer, was practical. "If you call the cops now, they can't do anything unless they catch him in the act. Just stay inside for a few days. Don't answer the door, and let me know if it happens again. I'll come to stay with you if I need to." I took his advice, staying in for the next few days, but it didn't help the anxiety. The next morning, I found another note on the door. My blood ran cold. "I like to watch you." I immediately snapped a picture and sent it to both my family and Michelle. I needed to know if she'd had any similar issues. She responded quickly, surprised and concerned, but denied knowing anything about stalkers in the area. Her response did little to reassure me. I decided to take matters into my own hands. After work, I wrote a note and taped it to the front door. "If you're looking for Michelle, she doesn't live here. She only rents out this house. If you keep this up, I'll report you to the police." It was a weak attempt to regain control. I thought it would work. I hoped it would work. For the first time in days, I went to bed without the haunting feeling of someone watching me. But the next morning, I found a new note. It wasn't mine anymore. It was a fresh one, and it chilled me to the bone. "I'm not looking for Michelle. I'm looking for you. Your name. I like watching you." I felt like I was going to be sick. This time, it wasn't just unsettling, it was personal. It wasn't about Michelle, or even the house. It was about me. Someone had been watching me. Someone knew my name. I texted my dad immediately. His response was immediate. He packed his things and drove up to my house, arriving well before I got home from work. The day had been unbearable. I couldn't focus on anything. My thoughts kept drifting back to the person behind the notes. I had no idea who it could be. Was it a coworker? Was it Fernando, that creepy guy who always stared at me too long? The thought made my skin crawl. That night, we didn't wait to call the police. My dad insisted we contact them immediately. We spoke to an officer who arrived, taking the note as evidence and offering some advice. But the officer's casual attitude didn't reassure me. "This kind of thing is common, don't worry too much," the officer said. But I did worry. As night fell, my dad insisted on staying on the front stoop, watching for anything suspicious. I lay in bed, my mind spinning. I wanted to sleep, to escape this nightmare. But sleep never came. Every sound felt like a threat. Every creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind outside, sounded like a warning. Hours passed. My dad remained vigilant. The next morning, nothing had happened. No knock at the door, no new note. I almost felt relief, but it was fleeting. I couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible was about to happen. After a few days, I was able to pack my things and move out. Michelle was understanding, though she seemed puzzled. There was no reason to suspect anyone in the neighborhood, and no one had seen anything strange. But the mystery lingered. Whoever had been stalking me never followed me to my new place, and for that, I was thankful. But I could never forget what happened. Who had been watching me? I'd never know. The terror of being observed, of feeling like someone was always there, waiting for the right moment to strike. Those feelings would haunt me forever. It was past midnight, and I was standing on my balcony, cigarette in hand, staring out into the darkness of my secluded neighborhood. I've been smoking every day for years, and while I recently started seeing a therapist about my nicotine addiction, it hasn't helped much. In fact, if I'm being honest, my biggest problem isn't even the cigarettes anymore. It's my sleep schedule. I stay up far too late, and I can't drag myself out of bed before noon. But these are minor issues compared to what happened next. I've always liked the quiet of my neighborhood. It's peaceful, with houses spaced apart. My neighbor's house is the only one I can see from my balcony. I've never met the guy, but I always assumed he lived alone. His navy blue BMW was the only car ever parked in his driveway, until one night, there was a black van parked in front of his house. It was strange, but I didn't think much of it at first. The next night, the van was there again. I told myself it was probably nothing, just a coincidence. But by the third night, I couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. I started watching the van more closely, trying to figure out its purpose. It became a bit of an obsession. I'd watch it from my balcony while smoking, hypothesizing about what it could mean. I know it sounds ridiculous, but I couldn't stop myself. I thought it was harmless until one morning around 5 a.m., when something happened that made me question everything. I was up late, as usual, finishing my cigarette when my neighbor walked outside. He carried something with him, something long, wrapped in black. At first, I thought it was a set of golf clubs, but it looked too heavy for that. I watched as he placed it carefully in the van, climbed into the driver's seat, and drove off. I was left standing there, dumbfounded. What could he have been carrying, and why was he being so secretive about it? The next day, I decided to take my observations a step further. I went to my balcony earlier that evening, my laptop open in front of me as I waited for the van to return. It wasn't until 1 a.m. that the van pulled into the driveway. I quickly closed my laptop, peering through the window. Nothing happened at first. The van sat in the driveway, engine idling, but after several minutes, the door opened, and he stepped out. This time, he seemed to struggle as he retrieved the same black bag from the van. He looked as if the weight was nearly too much for him to handle. Once he made it inside with the bag, I sat there, my mind racing. What was in that bag, and why did it seem so important to him? I needed answers. That night, I decided I couldn't just watch anymore. I had to find out what was going on. I grabbed my car keys and drove out after him. I turned my headlights off, following him for over 20 minutes before he veered off onto a dirt road that led into the woods. I followed cautiously, my heart pounding in my chest. The woods started thinning out, revealing an old, dilapidated gas station tucked away in the trees, and parked in front of it was the BMW, the same one that was always in his driveway. I knew I was getting too close, so I turned around and parked at the edge of the woods, waiting. It was nearly an hour before the BMW finally pulled away. I started driving again, my stomach in knots as I headed toward the gas station. When I arrived, I found the front door locked. I circled the building, trying every door and window. They were all sealed tight. Against my better judgment, I grabbed a rock and threw it through one of the windows. The alarm blared instantly, and I ran, my heart racing. I sped back to my house and called 911, giving a vague description before hanging up. The next morning, I woke up to find that things had escalated. I went to my balcony, only to be greeted by a dozen police cars in my neighbor's driveway. I watched in shock as my neighbor was escorted out of his house in handcuffs. My stomach churned. What had I gotten myself involved in? I tried asking the police for details, but they wouldn't answer. I even tried going back to the gas station, but the road was blocked off. It seemed like the whole situation was being swept under the rug, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was just a spectator to something far darker than I understood. That night, I had another nightmare. The same demon-like creature from before was there, only this time, it felt different. It was more real, more threatening. I woke up in a cold sweat, my heart hammering in my chest. The room was dark, but the hum of the AC unit filled the silence. I looked around, trying to shake off the lingering fear, but something wasn't right. I turned to look at the door, something I always kept shut at night, but it was open. I bolted upright in bed, confused. Had I left it open? I couldn't remember. I asked my roommate, Trish, the next morning if she'd come into my room. She hadn't. The next night, the creature returned. It was worse. This time, I felt its claws scrape against my skin. I woke up to find a sharp pain in my thigh. It wasn't just in my dream. There was a deep gash in my leg, right where I had felt it. I screamed and ran to the bathroom, staring in horror at the blood dripping down my leg. I couldn't explain it. There was no way I could have cut myself in my sleep. But Trish had an idea. She turned off the AC, and for the first time in days, the room went dead silent. That's when we heard it faint, but unmistakable. Someone was under my bed. I couldn't breathe. My mind raced, but I forced myself to stay calm. Trish and I bolted out of the apartment, pounding on our neighbor's door until he let us use his phone to call 911. When the police arrived, they confirmed the intruder was gone, but I knew something was wrong. The scratches on my leg weren't from a dream. They were real. The worst part, the creature from my nightmares, it wasn't just a figment of my imagination. It was him. He had been in my apartment, and now I was left to wonder if he was still out there, watching, waiting.